And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the State of UI. So excited to have all of our panelists here today. And I'm going to just go ahead and share my screen really quickly. So welcome. This is Modern Web's State of UI. It's our very first State of UI. It was very heavily requested, so we decided, you know what, we better put one together. So here we go. Wanted to give a quick shout out to our sponsors. So if you guys don't know about Progress and Kendo React, it's a professional UI and data viz component library for React. So what's amazing about it is you can actually cut your development time dramatically because Kendo React actually has some 90 plus feature-rich components with lots of advanced functionality. It's really easy to document. Well, no, it's not really easy to document. Sorry. It's really easy to integrate, and it's very well documented. It's customizable, fully accessible, and it plays well with your existing stack. So definitely check it out. And the website's really easy. It's just kendoreact.com. So shout out to our other sponsor, ThisDot. Go ahead and share this. We are hiring at ThisDot. So we are a framework agnostic tech consultancy. We have about 50 developers working with us. It's a fun place to be. And, you know, we work with some really cool and amazing clients. So it's really, really fun to be able to just like work with really awesome teams and really fun projects. So always open to like having conversation with new developers. Definitely feel free to drop me a line. I respond to the jobs at. Sometimes people are like, wait, what are you doing here? But yeah, so if you ever want to come and hang out, and you know, we do everything. So whether you're Angular, React, Vue, et cetera, just hit us up. Okay, so for those of you who aren't familiar with kind of all the Modern Web / ThisDot events, we do have a few upcoming events that you should definitely keep an eye out for. So next week, we actually have an advanced GraphQL training. This is a free training, and it's provided by Eve over at Moon Highway, for those of you who know Eve. Definitely check that out. Every month, we also do a monthly mentoring for women in tech. So if you're a woman in tech, it doesn't matter what level you're at, but it's a really fun place to be and just like hang out for an hour and have some good conversations. It's a private session, so you know, you can feel free to open up there about whatever problems you're having or like whatever things that you might need mentoring with. Really excited as well about State of Web Performance that's coming up. That's going to be late August. And then we also have React Contributor Days. That's happening on September 9th. I believe David and Sage, if I'm not mistaken, have been to those. But it's just a really great way to spend a few hours together with different people within the React ecosystem, talking about hard problems and learning from each other. So you know, it's kind of replacing the speaker room or the hallway tracks at conferences. And it's been really, really amazing during this time to kind of have that type of venue. So my name is Tracy. You can follow me on Twitter at LadyLeet, and I'm the CEO of a company called ThisDot Labs, also on the ArcsJS core team and a Microsoft MVP and a GDE. And Keon is my other host today.
Hi, I'm Keon, and I am a senior software engineer at ThisDot. And I am very happy to be here.
We're super excited to have you and really excited about the panel questions you prepared today. We have some amazing panelists as well. One of them couldn't join us today. Not anybody here, but we have first off Sage. So Sage, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself real quick.
Hey everyone, my name is Sage. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. We're excited to hear from you. And then we have Michael as well. Oh, you're muted.
I knew that was going to catch me. I'm Michael Shillman. I run a project called Storybook, which is a tool for building components in isolation that I'm sure I'll talk about in this State of UI. Thanks for having me.
Yes, love storybooks. And then we also have David.
Hey, I'm David Khorshid. My last name is actually not piano, contrary to popular belief. I just play the piano. That little piano right there. And I'm the creator of xdate, and I was most recently at Microsoft, but now I started my own company called Stately. And so, yeah, that's what I'm doing.
So excited. What a big leap. Oh my gosh. And next up we have Louis.
Thank you very much, everybody, for having me. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Louis Oriash, or Disco Lou, everywhere on the internet. And I'm a designer advocate at Figma, writer, podcaster, other things. I'm really looking forward to the chat today.
Awesome. Well, very, very excited to have you all. So the way this event works is we're going to quickly go to just kind of 5-minute updates on all the stuff that you all are working on. So we'll go with that. And then again, go on to the panel questions. I see some of y'all commenting on YouTube. Love to know where y'all are from. So feel free to post in the comments. And this is an interactive session. So, you know, feel free to ask questions to the panelists as we're talking, because, you know, we're all here to share and educate and hopefully bring more love to the JavaScript community. So I didn't pick yet, and we didn't talk about who is going to go first, but does anybody like have this dying urge to just get it over with?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, Louis, you're up first.
Thank you. I'll just have a very brief introduction of Figma for those who haven't come across us before. We're effectively a design platform for teams who build products. And what that means is whether you're a product team, web design team, UI team, UX team, or if you're building games, we're a platform that allows you to do that. So we really heavily index on design systems as well. We actually have an integration with Storybook. So I'm glad that Michael is here as well to talk about that. And what I do there is I advocate for the community and design in general. So what that effectively means is I sit in the middle of product design, marketing, and sales, and facilitate conversations amongst all those different people. Projects that we've been working on or shipping most recently, we actually most recently shipped a new product. So FigJam is our whiteboarding tool, which allows other people from a design adjacent position to get involved. And we've also released a branching feature. So branching is effectively aligning to a development workflow, which allows you to work in the same space, but also very siloed inside the same file. It's really exciting to see how we're going to be pushing the design and design to code space as well. Personally, I just wrapped up the first season of my new podcast called 8 Pixel Radio. I'd highly recommend you go and check that out. I also have a weekly newsletter called Milk No Sugar, which I'd also recommend you go and check out. I can talk about other projects as well, but I'm happy to pass the floor over to someone else.
That's awesome. So I know people have been really excited about that branching feature, but people, a lot of designers are like, okay, but like, how do I use it? So where's the best place to get some of that education?
Yeah, so we actually have a best practice guide. If you go to figma.com/best-practices, there's a branching best practice guide on there for you to go and check out. That's going to be updated soon as well. And we're also going to be doing a live stream about it as well. So there's tons of resources. Head over to YouTube, search Figma branching. There's enough there. Or you can just message me, and I'm happy to talk to you about it all day.
I love that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Again, if you have any questions for Louis about Figma, I mean, Figma is definitely like, I can't live without Figma. I love Figma. So love that you got to work on that. And if you have any questions, feel free to post in the comments below, and we'll be able to get those. And Louis, go ahead and post in the private chat the links to your podcast and everything, sure, so that way I can post it too.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. I know who I'm going to pick on next because his mic was unmuted. Not anymore, but it will be soon. So Michael, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I started talking about Storybook a little bit in my intro. Storybook is a tool for building out components in isolation. You basically pick scenarios for components and write small snippets of code to sort of stimulate your components into that state. It turns out to be a really productive way to build out UI. I believe Sage uses it in Chakra. I don't know if you guys use it at Figma, but a lot of folks, Twitter and Netflix and Spotify and like Airbnb, Uber, all the kind of modern UIs are using it. It supports Vue, Angular, React, web components, and so forth. The stuff we're working on lately is really a few big initiatives. One is a push into interaction testing. So Storybook has been primarily around static components and representing all the interesting states of your components. But there's a lot of interesting interactions you can have with your components. So we're doing a bunch of work on making that easier to simulate and test. And also embedding Storybook in other products. So Storybook is embedded in Zero Height for documenting design systems, InVision DSM for documenting design systems. There's a really interesting integration that just came out for UX Pin, which allows you to design with your production components. Love to see something like that in Figma at some point soon. And so we're basically making an API to make it easy to embed Storybook in other products, low-code products, design products, you name it. And should be announcing a bunch of stuff around that soon.
That's exciting. Do you all have a conference that you're going to be announcing at, or is it like just like soon we will hear from you?
We're still figuring out the timeline on all this stuff. We'll be putting out some posts and hopefully have some partners to announce with as well.
Awesome. Very cool. Or you can just follow Michael on Twitter for all the juicy gossip. Maybe like one day he's really tired and we'll just drop all the information before anybody else knows.
That's what I just did. It's midnight here, so there's flipping ships, and I.
Very true. Cool. Thank you so much for that update. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments. And next up, I'm going to pick on Sage to go next. We really love all the projects you're working on and really excited to hear some updates.
Yeah, for sure. Before I go ahead, I'd say I'm a huge fan of Storybook, Michael, and I mean, as well as Figma, Louis. It's just like my two favorite tools. I use them all the time when I have to build components. So it's really awesome to see. And I really love the new features in Figma, by the way. It's like it really makes building components a lot easier. So thumbs up to the team at Figma. So a quick one about Chakra UI. For those that are not aware, Chakra UI is a React and Vue component library that gives you all the building blocks that you need to build your apps, whether it's a website or a web app with speed. So basically, Chakra UI launched in September 2019, and it's been such an interesting journey, sort of building the team and growing the product as well. We probably started from a state where we're just a team of 3 people, and now it's so cool to see that we have a team of close to 15 people now working on React and Vue for Chakra UI. So I've been pretty excited about that. And when we started Chakra UI, we decided to go the full length of understanding the different aspects of building a web application that's accessible and sort of easy to make, right? So we went through building components to animations to making the components accessible to actually like styling the components and all the different aspects of building a web app today. So far since 2019, we've learned a lot from that process, and I'm excited to share that we've sort of seen the full extent of what it takes to build an app, and we've been changing our directions. Maybe not changing our directions, but heading in a new way of trying to figure out could there be a better way of building components? And this question has sort of led us down the road of instead of, at the moment, Chakra UI is some sort of big engine that sort of has styling and accessibility and component logic and everything all bundled in one. So we've been experimenting with different ways of making the system a bit more modular. So it's sort of easy to use Chakra UI in multiple frameworks. And this is really just possible because of the work that we've done on the React team and also for the Vue team. It's been an interesting journey learning how building accessible components works in React and Vue. And I think one of the biggest lessons we've learned literally is that a bunch of the component logic that we write is just it's quite similar when you're writing React and writing Vue. And basically, it's still one big JavaScript ecosystem. And we found that there are definitely ways to extract component logic, component accessibility, and basically even the styling engine of a component to make it in a way that is framework agnostic. That's why I'm very excited that David is here as well, because I've been a huge fan of xdate and state machines. Thank you so much for putting that out there. And really, I think I've watched literally every xdate video out there on YouTube, to be honest. And we've learned a lot. We've done a lot of experiments around how to build accessible components with xdate and with state machines. And I think we're pretty confident that this is the way to go. Right now, I'd say we're almost out of the experimenting phase, and we're pretty much like confident that this is the direction to go. We built out a couple of components using state machines, and we are currently exploring the idea of accessibility connectors, which means you build the component logic using the state machine, and you just like hook up some sort of connectors to make them accessible in a way that is framework agnostic. So you can share this logic in React, you can share this logic in Vue, you can share this logic even in Solid.js. It was so awesome to see that like all of these ideas literally work regardless of the framework you're writing code in. Right. So, I mean, I would say the future of UI development is generally should be framework agnostic, right? I feel like a lot of components that we write today, I mean, they are all based upon the solid, awesome work that's been done by the platform itself. And the more we start to leverage the platform tools, and the more we start to leverage the key ideas that have been embedded in the platforms, and awesome ideas or ideologies like the state machines, I think we're gonna like hit like a really good structure for the web as we grow over time. Right. So these are the areas. These are the things I'm really excited about. We are currently exploring these ideas, and at the same time, still maintaining Chakra UI and making it grow and try to teach people, educate more people, get them to learn a bit more about how to build accessible systems using Chakra UI. And I guess one of the biggest lessons I've learned so far is even though you build an accessible component library, it does not really mean developers would make their app accessible, because people still need to learn the basics of accessibility and learn how to compose components in a way that's accessible. And that has been an interesting challenge of education, making video content and helping people like learn these tools. Chakra UI makes it easy for people, but at the same time, there's still some core foundational knowledge you need to have as a developer to be able to make your app accessible. So it's more of like, we've been in the wizardry space, just trying to explore many ideas and try to learn what's possible for the future. And at the same time, we've been in the educational space, trying to think about how can we actually craft content to move the community forward towards all these things they need to learn to make their apps more accessible. All right, so that brings us into the whole ecosystem of Figma, Storybook, xdate, and Chakra UI. I'm really excited to have this conversation, honestly. So this is more of an update and also an appreciation, honestly, because I think like the ideas we're trying to explore would not be possible if not for Figma, xdate, and Storybook.
How true is that? You all are building. I love this event specifically because y'all are building stuff that like just is the foundation of everything and everything happening in web development now. So super excited about that. Well, David, Sage pretty much like teed you off. Like xdate is obviously the most amazing thing ever. So
yeah, thanks so much for that. And Sage, by the way, I'd love to help you out and work with you on Chakra. So like he talked about, and like I mentioned briefly, I created xdate. And if you don't know, xdate is a library for state machines and state charts, which they're a visual formalism for describing even the most complex application logic in a way that makes it easy to visualize, analyze, simulate, automatically generate documentation and tests, and so much more in the future. So a couple months ago, I quit my job at Microsoft to basically work on xdate full-time and work on even more stuff. And so our company is Stately, and our website is stately.ai. And so what we're going to be, I mean, we're a brand new company, startup, but what we're going to be are a suite of tools, visual software modeling tools and services for basically any kind of application logic you could think of. And so our goal is to make it accessible to both developers and non-developers alike, even if you're not using xdate. So you could sort of think of it as a unique combination of the ideas in Figma, trying to point at Figma, and Storybook right here, where the flowcharts and diagrams that you create actually come to life in your application code. I've been so obsessed with the idea of executable diagrams, where you're not just drawing a flowchart and then making a PNG or SVG out of it, but that flowchart is your actual application logic. And so it could be generated from code, or you could output it to code. And so that's sort of the dream state that we want to get to. And so we're building a whole bunch of tools. One of the things we're releasing really soon is a brand new visualizer, and also a registry where people could put their application logic and just be able to search for whatever they need, which I'm wondering how this has been missing for so long, but it's something that a lot of people have been asking for. And in the future, we're building a visual editor. And of course, all of these tools, we are using Chakra everywhere. It's just been a phenomenal UI library. So you'll definitely see it in our tools.
Well, that's awesome. I love, I remember when xdate was first a thing, and people were like, oh yeah, you should use xdate. And then then Ryan Florence, he posted that, I think it was shopping cart flow or something like that. And they were like, this is how we use xdate to do that. And it was oh, see, you all should use it. And now almost every developer I talk to is talking about oh, obviously using xdate. I mean, I love it because I think it really helps bring more inclusivity onto teams, because, architects can do it. And then junior developers or mid-level developers don't have to worry about freaking out and messing up state.
Right. That's the idea.
Yeah, and it provides just much more, again, just accessibility and inclusivity into the development world. So I think that's amazing. Well, again, feel free to post questions in the chat as we're going along, but I will hand it over to Keon, who is going to be leading the panel.
Hi. So I sort of heard something really interesting that you guys were talking about, and this idea behind being agnostic. And I wanted to hear you guys maybe expound a little bit more upon that. Do you think that's where UI UX is going? Do you think, because I mean, I've built so many buttons, and a button is a button at the end of the day, right? Nobody wants to build the same logic over and over. So what can we do to be more agnostic?
Yeah, the amount of buttons that I've pushed or variants that I've created is absolutely outrageous, but I think I'm here for it, absolutely. But I think the one thing we all strive for is consistency, and particularly when you're thinking about systems. And in order for us to reach that ultimate goal, we probably need to think about shipping things that are generic enough for everybody to use, but are customizable enough at the same time, which is an impossible task. But I think that we will crack it at some point. And it's that agnostic approach, whether it's whatever language you're using, whatever tool you're using, that ultimately you need to have something that can be documented and used by a user, which is accessible as well. And that long-term goal is enable us to force the industry through that pipeline. I think we've got the right people on the call to do that. From an agnostic perspective in terms of design, I think as long as designers have the ability to get their ideas onto a digital paper, we're all going to be successful. And I think that the speed at which we can get that idea from your head into production, regardless of whether you're using Vue or React or whatever, is again going to enable us to push the industry forward as fast as we can. And I think that's why these particularly unique tools which enable you to do that are going to enable us to move a lot faster than we possibly have done in the past, particularly when you can think about Figma's use of things like APIs to access things on the canvas, to get those ideas out. So everybody doesn't need to be a developer to get those things through the pipeline. I think we're in a really good spot at the moment.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And for me, I'd say I mean, being a unicorn between a designer and developer at the same time, I'd say Figma has been really amazing. I'd say just as in Figma, where you can design a mobile app and a website at the same time. Basically, you have to do the same set of things if you want to build a mobile app and you want to build a website in Figma. It doesn't change because you're trying to build a mobile app. So while there are best practices you have to follow when you're trying to design a mobile app and when you're trying to design a website, I think basically we can map the same ideas or concepts to being a developer or creating a framework agnostic UI system for developers as well. And I think mentally speaking, I can break this down into 4 different pieces, right? So any piece of UI, any piece of application basically has some sort of logic or behavior. So if you want to be very specific about building components, let's just call this component logic. So every component, whether you're building like an accordion or a model or some sort of bottom sheet, it has some sort of behavior to that, right? And I mean, just as we've seen with xdate and with state machines, it's pretty easy. Right now, it's such a breeze to actually model the behavior of a component in a way that is framework agnostic. So I would say that is just one check, I mean, of the 4 items. And I'd say we've been able to at least solve that so far as an ecosystem. And I'm really excited about that. And I think the second piece is literally accessibility. And accessibility has been like a really, I think it's pretty new in the space. Like everyone is getting to see the importance of making sure your application is accessible and your components are accessible by going from color contrast to keyboard navigation to screen reader support. All of these things, it's really hard for a designer to get right in Figma. You cannot really design for them because they are not like a thing that you can see or touch or experience, right? And I think this is also an area where we have different libraries in the ecosystem in React, in Vue, everyone all chasing down to solve this problem of accessibility. And I think over the next coming years, we'll start to see most of these ideas converge into some sort of framework or idea on a meta level to actually see how to solve this problem together. I think that's the second piece. The third piece, just like you discussed, Louis, is sort of style and variants. When you talk about designing button and button variants, there's I think everyone in the development space have sort of designed some version of buttons 5 or 10 times over and over again, whether with HTML or with Sars or with React. Essentially, we all do the same set of things, whether you use CSS or you use some utility library, or you write CSS in JS. Basically, we are trying to communicate the same set of ideas, which is how do I style my components and how do I create multiple variations of that component. Again, we're getting towards that state where, from an API standpoint, everyone is getting some sort of shared knowledge of how this should be modeled. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I mean, in as much as I made Chakra UI, I know other libraries out there that are actually doing an awesome job of sort of modeling this system. I think Pedro is on here in the comments. I mean, so I'm really excited about modules and stitches and the work they are doing as well. So this is one area I think that the ecosystem will gradually get to, and we will be able to form some sort of framework agnostic model around this. And then the last one, which is really interesting, is motion, which is motion, animation, transitions, making sure your components feel smooth when you tap them, when you swipe. All of these tools already exist in Figma for a designer to model in a way that just works coherently across mobile and web. But this is something that's pretty much lacking in the ecosystem. We have Framer Motion, which is super awesome. I mean, shout out to Matt for helping. I mean, that is such an amazing tool, and I think that Framer Motion should be a gift to the entire ecosystem, not just the React ecosystem. So I'm really looking forward to see how this motion engine interaction animation can actually get framework agnostic. All right, so these are the 4 key pieces. I think we have maybe just 2.5 check in my mind. I mean, I'd say I'd leave the extra 1.5 for the next couple of years, and I think we'll be there.
As we made Storybook framework agnostic from the get-go, and we support probably over a dozen different frameworks. Sometimes I wish we had just done one and done it really well, but we made that choice because we believe in kind of supporting diversity in the tech, and I would say it's just a tremendous amount of work to do justice to all the work that's done in all these different frameworks. And it's really great that everything's kind of evolving at the same time. But as somebody who's kind of stuck between 17 different frameworks, sometimes I'd love to just do one really well.
So I'll jump in here with a harsh truth that you all might have experienced, and it's that your favorite framework is not going to be here forever. And I know some of you might be saying like, all right, no, React is definitely like 10, 20 years from now, I'm still going to be doing React. But even if it's still around, I mean, you still have Angular 1.x around, jQuery is still around. Even if they're around or not, the problem is that you're going to have shifting app requirements. Like you might need to move this React app to React Native, or you might need to implement the same logic in Flutter or Dart or Swift, or even a different framework. And so that's why being framework agnostic is important. And I echo everything that Sage said, especially about like the idea of representing your logic in a way that it doesn't matter which framework you're using. And that was one of my main motivations for xdate too. I made a few examples where I would code the logic as a machine, put it in React, and then spend maybe 10 minutes just putting it in Vue with all of the exact same logic. And so I think it's important because even besides the whole framework agnostic part, even if you're going to be using the same framework for, I don't know, the rest of your life, just being able to approach things in a framework agnostic way allows you to cleanly separate the logic from the view, which is something that a lot of practitioners talk a lot about, like just making sure that there's like a clean separation and that everything has their own responsibilities. So yeah, that's one of xdate's primary goals.
So Sage, you mentioned something about, there's this piece, this part with accessibility and how hard that is for everyone. And, as people who are trying to create a good user experience for everyone across the board, accessibility is important. And since we don't sort of have that framework or something pulling everything together yet, what are maybe some tips or tools or resources that you all think can help somebody who's maybe new to accessibility or trying to start making their application more accessible?
Yeah, that's such a good question. That makes me think a little bit. Let me see. Interesting. Okay, cool. So I'd say like one of the first places I can easily recommend is a course by Mercy Sutton, Web Accessibility. I think V2 on Front-End Masters. So you can easily just go there and sort of educate yourself, get some basic knowledge around accessibility, and sort of get some practical ideas and tips. I think that helped me a lot. Close to like 2 years ago, 1 year ago, roughly, when I wanted to sort of master this concept. Right, I think that's a good place to start. I think as with regards to resources, I think you can also check out the W3 guide to accessibility. I think it's called WAI area. So it's sort of like a spec to be an accessible application. Not just an accessible component library, but an accessible web application in general. So it's a little bit boring, feels like some sort of like manual or like encyclopedia, but if you take your time, you'll be able to sort of get all the different pieces, and at least you'll be able to extract the important information from there and feel a bit more confident building accessible components and applications. So that's so with regards like tooling, I mean, I'd definitely recommend Storybook. And by the way, with accessibility, there's a nice, neat Storybook add-on for accessibility for a front-end developer. So once you have Storybook installed, you can just install the add-on there. And each time you try to present a component, a component state or UI, you actually get to see whether a component is accessible or the key areas that you need to improve basically to make it more accessible. And there are a few dev tools as well you can also install. I think there's an Axe plugin or Chrome extension you can install. Firefox is also my go-to browser when it comes to like debugging accessibility. So you can also like use the accessibility inspector. I mean, even in Chrome as well. So I mean, these are the key things you want to look out for. I mean, for a start. And then when you get to the intermediate or advanced zones, then you probably want to start learning about screen readers, how to use different screen readers for Mac OS and for Windows. So basically, that's sort of like getting into the zone when you know all the different terminologies and you feel like you're really getting the hang of accessibility. I think that'll be like a really good place to start. And for very basic things, for the beginner level type accessibility, there are very simple things like keyboard navigation, color contrast, making sure that the component's legible, the top area size, and basically all of these different tool ideas. I think you can, just a simple Google or a couple of YouTube videos to be able to fill in the knowledge gap. I'm happy to share some more resources as well.
I can jump in here from a practical design perspective as well. And I think somewhat ironically, government websites or the design system teams behind government websites are actually doing some of the best work. In particular, the UK government and the Australian Digital Transformation Agency have awesome documentation websites for how they're building, scaling their components across all the different platforms there and websites they have to support. So I definitely recommend you check those out. They make it really easily digestible to have just a read through, because as Sage mentioned, some of the documentation for accessibility can be quite dense. So starting with those ones is a really nice place for people who are curious. Aside from that, there's some other businesses that are doing awesome stuff. So Stark is a business that is solely trying to make accessibility accessible to other designers as well. They have a suite of tools and plugins, whether you're using Figma or XD or even Chrome or something like that. They have plugins for that, so an extension. So I recommend you check Stark out. And lastly, there's a great plugin for Figma from Microsoft called Ali Focus Orderer, Ali spelled A11Y, and that effectively allows you to attach focus orderer information to your components. And this is something we could probably do ourselves with our libraries, but it's a really nice place to start.
Yeah, also from Microsoft is Accessibility Insights. I'll send a link to that, but like a lot of these tools use the same checker under the hood, the Axe checker, and this just produces like mountains of information. And so like the Storybook add-on that Sage mentioned tries to present that in a friendly way. Accessibility Insight is like a much more prescriptive way of trying to walk you through that. And I think when you're dealing with like an overload of information, it's good to have kind of an opinionated way to deal with it.
I can't wait until, I know there's been a lot of accessibility content that has been coming out and everything, but like you look at some of the resources we have these days, like web.dev, for example, coming out of Google, and just how to make web development in general more accessible from a content perspective. And I would love to see so much more of that, right? To where like there's so much content about accessibility on the web to where, people are like, oh my God, it's everywhere. So shout out to everybody who's building all this content. And I see some of you guys posted the link, so I'll put those in YouTube right now.
We have some questions from chat. I think Joe is asking, what's the best way to approach design system implementation across different apps and frameworks in an organization?
How long do we have? I think that the way I typically approach this from an advisory perspective is what's your budget and scale and team size. If it's one person trying to implement a system across 1,000 different other designers, you've got an uphill struggle, but there are definitely ways we can break this down. I think the first thing we do is start with our fundamentals, foundations, primitives, however you want to define that in your organization, and get those set up and make them robust. Make them, as you mentioned before, make them device agnostic and test them across your platforms. Get buy-in from one of your engineers so you can have design and development resource behind it as a little micro team to get yourself started, and then you can scale up from there. So once you've got those foundational atomic elements sorted out, so styles, typography, that sort of stuff, you can start building your components on top. Get your atoms done, get your molecules done, get your organisms done, and start scaling up one by one across the organization. You're probably going to have to start from your live products backwards if you already have existing products, and start documenting everything you have from an existing perspective in the form of an audit. So looking through, if you're looking on a website, going through every single template you have, finding all the buttons, documenting them. There's a redesigning them, focusing them, documenting them inside your systems, and then publishing them out to the team. If you're starting from fresh, amazing. You can start in the best way possible, in which case I would still have the same approach. Have our foundations, I have my atoms, molecules, and organisms in the exact same way. But you're going to be allowed to set that foundation up from the first way. I'm sure the others have some advice from a technical perspective as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'd probably say I have like two answers to that. One would be to have a shared design token or like some sort of like shared token system when it comes to colors, fonts, line heights, letter spacing, text styles, color styles. Basically, most of the design-oriented decisions that the company or the product has made. So you probably want to keep that in some sort of shared framework agnostic format. I think that would be very helpful. And I think the second one I would vote for if you are starting a new system is to have some shared logic system, which is basically pretty new and can be quite challenging. But I mean, I'll definitely recommend you learn a bit more, invest some time to learn about xdate, state machines, and sort of have this sort of like shared knowledge or shared structure for component logic. And then just like mesh these two together, or these two ideas together, combine that with a bit of like HTML structure, accessibility, basically not React or doing any magic. It's basically having a strong knowledge of HTML and ensuring that like your component, the structure of your HTML semantics is accessible, and then composing that with sort of some good like design token practice and shared logic. I think you'll be able to go very far with these two ideas. And obviously with your atoms and molecules, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that term, Joe, but I think basically just like designing the buttons, the inputs, basically all of the atomic components or elements that your app has, and creating that ahead of time. So it's really easy to implement them across frameworks. Yeah.
So I think that's a really interesting point that Sage made, where design systems isn't just about, or it shouldn't just be about like how the different components look and the different variants, but also how they work. Like whenever I work with a designer or a design team, there are flowcharts, and the flowcharts are very important parts of the actual design, because we're not just creating art, we're creating design, which is how it works. And so, yeah, being able to represent and have those flowcharts as part of a design system, I feel is important. Maybe I'm biased, but like, state machines, flowcharts, however you want to represent them, have them in your design system as well.
In Storybook, we kind of integrate the structure of how you build up your components with how you build your components. And so the easiest way to kind of get started is if the tools that you're using are basically supporting the structuring from the get-go. And I think like if it's a big company, maybe you have a lot of resources to build out special tools or build out a design system from scratch. But I think a lot of people just want to get stuff done. And so if the tools that you're using to build on a day-to-day basis are also kind of allowing you to organize as you go, that kind of makes it much easier to share structure, to share tools.
So Hugo Raymond also has a question, and he asks, with design systems acting as agents of change, how do you manage change across products and different architectures, like monoliths and micro front ends, et cetera, when different products have different distinct priorities?
As I saw Sage do a very interesting little chin stroke just then. I think we're all doing a mental chin stroke at the moment. And I think the fundamental here is that we have to accept that things take time, and that regardless of whether you're working in a monolithic organization or a small startup, you have to have a plan. And that plan is going to mean probably doubling the expectation of the time you think these things are going to take. And when you've got different priorities across different products and trying to share a same UI, that is going to be very difficult. But ultimately, someone needs to own it. And that person needs to be cross-functional and sitting in all these different tables across the business to get it done. And unless we have buy-in across the organization from all the different departments, it's going to be very hard. So the first thing I think you need to do is turn yourself into a salesperson and go and market yourself across these different teams who have the different priorities and try and align somewhere so we can start small. And I think starting small is always going to be the best way to get anything done. But particularly if you're working probably internationally, multi-product, I'm sure the stories from Microsoft are probably quite similar in how you manage to get things done or not across such an organization of that size. And so I'd love to get some perspective from that too.
Okay, so let me just like fill in. Yeah, let me fill in the silence a little bit. I think like getting buy-in, especially when you're dealing with a large team, is quite a difficult problem to solve. And I'm not sure like what the structure of your organization is, Hugo. I think like just convincing people to use design systems is a tough problem in itself. I mean, not to talk about like introducing some way to share logic using xdate. That is also another like difficult problem when it comes to convincing the big guns in your company to actually embrace this idea. So just like Louis mentioned, I think with design systems you have to be like a developer, a salesperson, and a designer at the same time. Basically, you want to sell the idea or the concept, not just because it's a cool idea, but because you see that there's business value in actually implementing design systems across multiple products and across multiple teams, right? And the only way you can make sense of this is to actually correlate the efficiency of using design systems with actually some real business value or some real business output. And what is pretty obvious here is, I think one quick example I can give is instead of having to hire 2 to 3 new developers for the different products, implementing the same buttons and the same set of components over and over again, it'd be good to sort of show like a proof of concept of like how this could potentially save the business time and save the business money at the same time. So it's sort of switching. That's like the salesperson in you trying to convince the team to sort of embrace the idea. But from an implementation perspective, I think you also want to be armed with lots of proof of concepts to show that this actually works, and actually get to speak to different people in these different teams and architecture to work with you. So you are able to sort of form a strong basis of argument to make design systems a priority in the company.
Just to follow up again from the point earlier, I think that the question of with design systems acting as agents of change, maybe they don't have to be, and we can be comfortable with the fact that sometimes we can have scrappy systems. I know that's with a designer's mindset of perfection at all costs, that's probably quite hard to manage. But I know that some companies do work by making updates, by taking a screenshot of the product, pulling it into a design tool, updating it, and getting the engineers to build it. And that works for them. So we've got this long-term goal of everything being systemized, documented, tokenized, etc. But sometimes we don't have to. And if it allows us to ship products at scale, maybe that's the winner for everybody. So I think we need to find that balance of super scrappy and super organized, and find where we sit on that line in that transition to make sure that we can enable our business to move forward.
I would say there's kind of a political aspect of all this, but then there's just like the technical aspect of like, how do you make it happen? And one of the bits of the question is like managing change and having different teams pull things in different direction. And I'd like to plug kind of the notion of tests as like a key element to all this, specifically visual regression tests. And I work on a product called Chromatic that does that. But like the main thing being that like you have the shared resource, you have it being kind of pulled in 10 different directions for every kind of use case, and simply knowing when changes happen is really powerful. And so if you have a picture of your component in a particular state before a change and after, and you can see those things as they come in, it's a really simple idea, but it kind of allows you to understand all the impacts, because the more people that are collaborating on a system, the more likely it is that somebody's going to tweak a piece of CSS somewhere and break your use case. So having tools that help you find that quickly and understand the changes is really useful.
So you mentioned visual regression, and that's becoming a really big thing. What are your thoughts on visual regression testing? Do you think it's something that's necessary and that we should all start moving towards? I know one of the challenges I faced when trying to implement visual regression is just how expensive it can be, especially if you're doing like a pixel-to-pixel checking or you're storing these images somewhere. How do you handle that just mess?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I sort of feel like the best tests are the ones that you didn't have to write. And so like if you look at it from a testing lens, you could be kind of building out a whole suite of like checking the DOM structure before and after a change or whatnot. And so when you just when the medium is visual and we're working in a visual medium, like hitting OK on some changes is a small price to pay versus like building effectively like a second product in addition to your first product to test it. I'm biased, but I'm totally sold on it. It's how we build our product. We eat the dog food and we're addicted to it.
I think that I haven't done too much like visual regression testing. Like contrary to popular belief, by the way, at Microsoft, I really didn't do any sort of UI or even front end for that matter. Yeah, they sort of just pushed me into back end land for 4 years, but that was fine. But as far as visual regression testing, I think that as valuable as it is, it can be easy to miss stuff. For example, you have to think about empty states, you have to think about different browsers, and also animations. Animations become a bit tricky too. But I think it's still good in the overall goal of just making sure that every single possible state of your app is captured and that it looks correct. However, I found that a lot of visual regression testing tools can sometimes give you like false positives or false negatives, whatever we want to call it, and say like, oh, this moved, but like, what is the goal? Like, is the goal to make sure that everything's pixel perfect, or is the goal to make sure that everything within certain constraints is available for the user to consume? That's a harder question to answer, even from visual regression testing. So that's more of an open question, not really a answer of any kind.
I think that's a really awesome point, because when we start to think about design or development in its siloed state, we can definitely say, yeah, we're going to strive for pixel perfection. As soon as we start to think about the growth of a business and we're thinking, let's A and B test something, we're definitely going to end up with pixel imperfection or colors that possibly don't align with our system. And we need to be comfortable with that. I think ultimately for me, whether it's hyper detailed technical regression testing or whether it's somebody manually looking through pixel by pixel to see if things are on point, we need to measure the return on investment from those tests. And if we can't do that, then we can't sell it. And I've possibly at risk of sounding like a broken record, but a designer as a salesperson is effectively what we need to be doing every single point of our decision-making process. And then unless we're doing that, it's going to be very difficult to do anything in the business. And again, measuring that up and saying, is this going to be deal breaker for us if this button, I know we keep saying buttons, if this header is 1 pixel out of place or not? Are we still going to be able to sell products? And if the answer is yes, then maybe we need to be okay with that.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think maybe the last thing I'll add to that is when it comes to testing, we want to be careful that we are not testing like implementation details of like the border radius or the background color changes. Like, hey, what did you do to the background color? But I guess like one of the things we want to pay attention to is how would this visual regression affect the user or the end user basically in question, right? So all of testing, I mean, from first principles, is meant to be about testing how the user is going to interact with the app, not how the pixel is perfect on the screen. Basically, if a button used to be 48 pixels tall and now it's 6 pixels tall, then that's a big issue for the user, and that's going to affect the user experience. So that's something worth paying attention to. But then if the border radius changed, sometimes it's like a huge question of like, do we want to waste our time going down the rabbit hole of tracing or tracking down who changed the border radius, or do we want to like just go around to check through like, are we hurting is there like any visual regression that damages the user experience that we need to pay attention to?
I think one of the key things is just understanding that a change occurred, right? And that's where like these automated tools really help. So when you have a big system and like whether you care about that border change is sort of a secondary question. Some people might just approve it, but like these are complex systems. And so you can make a tiny change in one part of the code and it can have all sorts of ripple effects, and just understanding that is what happened is hugely valuable.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Hunter Miller from the chat asked, related to agnostic UI, we've seen the effort required to make customizable and accessible components. Is it maybe time we start thinking of better web primitives using the ideas that we've converged on?
I'll say that like any web primitives, like, you know, dream ideal web primitives are like, even if something is like fully spec'd out and everyone wants it, it's going to be years out. So we have two goals. First, pushing that forward, you know, to the W3C, and also just doing the best we can with what we have in the browser right now. You know, standards move a little quicker than before, but still pretty slowly. So it's just my 2 cents.
Interesting. So I think maybe just had to take some time to think through how I want to answer this question. But I'd say like with web primitives, I think it's a little bit tricky because just like David mentioned, no matter how spec'd out a component is, I think one of the biggest things we'll see is the way it's implemented across different browsers might end up being inconsistent. And just like we know right now, building a component isn't the best experience, especially when you have to test across Chrome and Safari, the cutest browser. And then, you go to like Firefox and all of these different browsers, and especially mobile browsers as well. So I feel like at the end of the day, we might end up with a little bit like inconsistent experience and quirks we have to work around either way. So it's still best to work with what we have. And with building components, I would say maybe like it's definitely going to take a long time to actually get like one new component, one new primitive on the platform, because there's lots of conversations going around in the working group, and actually getting it to work across and making that a pass for all different browser systems is definitely quite some work. So I'll definitely recommend like just make the best use of what you have and be able to follow the spec. Usually the spec comes out before the implementation. So if you're able to go through the spec and actually model your components with that ahead of time, I think you'll be doing pretty well. And even when the platform supports it, there'll be very little deviation from the spec. So you'll still be on the safe side.
I think also to link this back to Hugo's question earlier about practical examples of people trying to battle systems across different organizations with different tech stacks and different states of different components. Linking that to Sage is that we should try and work with kind of what we've got at the moment. Unless you're working on sort of side projects and that sort of thing where you can test the latest tech, unfortunately, in reality, we're probably working in systems where we need to balance a couple of years old tech a lot of the time, and to try and flex those as much as we can. But yeah, absolutely. If the industry can move faster, I think we're all going to be happy.
I was going to say, I read the question a little bit differently, which is like web primitives could be actually kind of web standards, but they could also just be abstractions. So for example, like Radix UI is like completely unstyled sort of primitives for building out your own component library. And I think that there's a lot of interesting work going on to kind of build out these like parameterized accessibility baked in type systems, but that ultimately give the expression to the developer for how these things look. So I don't see that coming into the browser, but like it's an interesting development in the space.
I always love the idea of like, look, browser standards take a while. I mean, except if you look at Jamie Kyle's last one, I don't remember, but I was just like, dude, stage 3 already? What the heck? But, you know, we want web standards to be a little bit slower than we would like because we live with it forever. So think about all the fun decisions that you disagree with on the web platform, and then think about the things you want, and think about how potentially you might not actually want those in like 5 or 10 years. But I love the idea of like thinking about it like web primitives too, right? And not just web standards.
I want to say I completely agree with Tracy. The reason that it's slow, it's a very good reason. You don't want it to be fast. We have it for life.
Breaking the web.
Could you guys maybe speak about, you know, some of your favorite techniques or tools, automated or otherwise, that you use to help determine and improve the front end and performance of your applications?
Okay, hi Michael, go ahead.
I would say my single favorite tool recently is React.lazy for code splitting, and we've been doing a huge performance push in Storybook at every different level, and kind of deferring work in various forms is the easiest way to get free performance. And React.lazy is a really easy way to do that for React UI.
Awesome, and I think a fairly common way that is shared across most people is Next.js as well. I mean Next.js comes with like really built-in performance improvements, especially when it comes to like bundling your app and code splitting across routes, and just loading components dynamically, and all of these interesting improvements. And I think that Next.js definitely like a framework to look out if you're building like really serious web apps these days. And even if you're just building a simple landing page, I think there's built-in bundle size analyzer in Next.js. There's also like they also like pay attention to all of these different like web metrics basically. So like all of these different things you want to actually pay attention to, like the time it takes to interact with the first element on your site, the time it takes for your site to get painted on screen. All of these different technical things you have to know is all baked into the framework itself. So I always recommend Next.js as a place to start, because you have all this suite of tools that you need. And definitely like when you start to build, even with Next.js, again, as with we developers, even when you have the easiest tool, you can easily mess it up. And when you mess things up in the best frameworks, you have the React Dev tools, and even just your Chrome extension, monitoring performance and profiling in React as well. I think I saw like an interesting Chrome extension plugin called React Time that helps you play back like a React interaction. How you interact with a component helps you play that back and forward at the same time. So it's really interesting to see. I played with it last week, but I'm curious to try it out some more as well. And again, I think the last one I would always recommend is the xdate visualizer. I mean, it's a little bit tricky, but I mean, the way I tend to see it is when you have like a very complex component, is very obvious when you try to visualize the components. So if you are able to sort of draw a flow chart to show the logic of a component and gets complex, or is really complex to explain, there's a high chance it's going to affect your application's performance at the end of the day when the single decisions you make are very incorrect or inaccurate or unperformant. Your app gets big, your app gets bloated, your app is full of bugs, and like all of these different things you want to pay attention to, right? So a combination of those ideas would help you.
Yeah, and with the inspector, we're also going to be releasing a new version soon, and eventually just have features to show you like, hey, this is slow, this is fast, like just doing a whole bunch of analysis on your transitions. Not xdate's faults, but just like whatever other logic you're doing, we could, point out like, hey, this is slow. But I have actually been really interested in a brand new tool called Astro, and it's at astro.build if you're interested in it. And I know that we try to optimize for the JavaScript that we already have in our applications, but Astro takes a different approach. It says, why not like include as little JavaScript as possible? And we're not just talking minification or gzip or lazy loading code or anything. It's really like if your app uses barely any JavaScript, then you should be sending almost no JavaScript to the page. And so what's really cool about Astro.build is you could use it with any framework, or at least I guess the most popular ones, Vue, Svelte, Angular, React, I don't know, Vue, I already said Vue, but like, I'm not sure which ones, but it will only include the code on your page for that component in what's called islands. So it's only loading the JavaScript that you need. And so that's why my stance has been like the easiest way to approach performance is just load less JavaScript. Like that is the lowest hanging fruit that you could do. Just, remove that JavaScript. So please take a look at astro.build. It's really cool.
And I posted the link as well in chat.
What do you guys hope to see in UI UX over the next 5 years? In anything at all, in any sort of subtopic?
Hope is a big word. I think that we spoke about agnostic earlier, and I think that sometimes agnostic design can become homogeneous, and we see a trend towards similar looking products and apps and websites, particularly driven by things like the real strong guidelines of iOS and Android, informing people that if you do a menu, it needs to look like this. And I think sometimes I'd like to see people break the grid a little bit and step outside of these guidelines that are being sort of placed on top of us. So we do see more interesting things. I think the most interesting designs I ever see are from people's side projects. And that allows us to just get a bit more insight into the possibilities that you can have. Like tools that we have for design are unlimited canvases, but we still tend to build boxes inside of boxes. And it'd be great for people to break that a little bit and roll back. Like you remember in the 90s, early 2000s when things were wild. And let's go back a little bit and see if we can introduce some more frivolity to our designs. And I think it'd be great to see designers abandon some of these conventions and start to really flex on things. Sometimes it'd be great to abandon the 8-point grid system. I know it's fantastic and we use it every single day in our designs, but maybe let's do something like 7 or 9, maybe a 3-pixel border radius, right? Push the boat out a little bit.
I love that idea though. It's like always thinking about not just building on top of what you have, but like if you could change the mental model, what could that potentially be?
So, well, one of the things I've been most excited about, which was actually like a research topic a few years ago, is adaptive UIs. And that's something I really hope to see in the future. Whereas like you would think of UIs as we have today, they adapt to certain devices, device width and height. And like, we would see a website or an app differently on our phone than our computer. But adaptive UI sort of takes that a step further. It adapts the UI based on the user. And so it's no longer this whole one size fits all with UI, but the UI actually says, well, the user, it might be a power user, so we want to surface these things that the user is used to doing or the user might be a newer user, might need a little bit more guidance. And so it's sort of like accessibility plus plus. Not only are we increasing the capabilities of the application to many different users, but we're also adapting it to their needs so that no matter what skill level you have on the app, it adapts to you. And so this takes a little bit of mind reading, so you could see machine learning in play here. But I think that that's a potential future for user interfaces that I really want to see.
Interesting. I guess I mean one idea I've been quite excited about is the GitHub Copilot that was recently released, and I think it has been. I've only used it for a couple of weeks, but it has been it has made me like super productive when writing code, and I literally tend to maybe have to install some package because I can just write some comments and it just does all the code for me, at least for the most part, right? And I think I would love to see this like go a bit more advanced or get a lot better over time, because I'm really excited about this. And I mean, if we take a stretch at 5 years, I would say it would be really great to have some like GitHub Copilot version for Figma, which is like I just put like something on screen that says like button 48 pixel tall and have Figma just sketch that out, because I think like there's quite a ton of people that have designed like 1 million variants of buttons already to learn from. So I mean, I'm really excited to see like this kind of tools come up, because I think we're getting to the age where like machines have learned enough from all of different code and design we've done for the past century to actually help us or aid the work that we do. Right, so I'd love to see that. And I guess the second one is some sort of visual programming tool. It's very close to no code, but essentially I want to be able to move a bunch of boxes and flowcharts around and be able to model the logic of my application without having to write any code at all. Right, so I mean, I think this is an idea that xdate and Stately is probably pursuing right now, and I mean, I think I'm excited to see like other ideas out there as well, because it's really going to help us, I mean, a lot as a collective.
Yep, we're definitely working on that.
Yeah, I was going to say regarding kind of the no code, low code, there's like this whole kind of interesting collection of tools that are becoming more and more popular. And then meanwhile, there are like huge kind of teams building out really tight, really high quality UIs using lots and lots of code. And so I'm interested to see how those two start to really blend together, because right now it's kind of siloed, and I think there'll be a lot of interesting stuff in the middle, reusing kind of high quality components in low code environments and vice versa. And so as those things start to mix, both on the tooling side, but also on the workflow side, and who can build these things, right? Like on the high code side, it's a pretty high bar to get in, and so it should change the way that we work.
What are some of your favorite browser development tools, and what do they help you accomplish?
Let's see. I'd say like browser development tools. I mean, I tend to use like the CSS. I mean, as weird as it sounds, I tend to use the CSS overview a lot in Chrome, so I can actually like track when we use design tokens and when we don't. That's like an easy one. And if I want to like take it to the next level, I have there's a tool called CSS Scan that I use a lot, just to like scan through the page and actually like see the areas of the page that actually, are consistent, and literally measure components to see if they actually match the design. I use that a lot when working with teams or with designers. So I think that's like very helpful. I think I also use the accessibility inspector in Chrome when reviewing components, just as a quick overview, to just like see like the HTML structure and also the accessibility tree to see if this makes sense based on the spec or not. I use that a lot, so that's the best I can remember off the top of my head. So I'll add some more if I remember them.
Are any of you guys familiar with WebAssembly? And if so, where do you see this sort of interacting with front-end libraries and applications?
I'll be honest, I'm not too familiar. I just know that it's like a different compilation target that also works for the web. But I mean, the promises of performance, especially, I think are, well, really promising. So, and especially like I've seen some really cool experiments where we're porting different tools over and just having them work on the web, like AutoCAD and things like that. And I think that's going to enable like a whole new type of application on the web. For example, Figma, like I learned, was like it's just what, almost all WebGL or something like that. It's absolutely crazy. So I'm really inspired by that.
Yeah, Figma is effectively, it came at the exact right moment WebGL became a possibility for applications of this scale. And we've effectively run with it, which has given us a really awesome roadmap historically of building on the years and years of WebGL that we've managed to load all our features on top of. So yeah, we hit it at the right time.
I think it'll be really interesting to see kind of other languages come in and hopefully disrupt the JavaScript monopoly in the browser, and also a tooling nightmare at the same time. Like we've just gone through the kind of 10 years of like all these different Babel versions and so on, and it feels like things are just kind of standardizing right now on maybe TypeScript as like a proxy for kind of the set of features that are like what modern 2021 JavaScript looks like, and you can kind of throw away all these tool chains and just use like a ESBuild or Deno or something that like does one thing really fast, and it's really great to have that. And then at the same time, it's kind of opening up this whole Pandora's box of a whole new set of stuff, which I think is ultimately for the good of everybody. But it's like another wild ride ahead. Be nice to just sit and enjoy what we have for a little bit.
Hopefully WebAssembly doesn't affect all of us, because it's just going to be used under the hood to make everything faster. And developers, well, I guess JavaScript developers don't have to worry about it. I think that's basically what most WebAssembly people are saying, though. Like, it's cute that you care, but you don't have to. And JavaScript developers don't have to learn WebAssembly. You're welcome.
That's what they want you to believe.
Do you guys have any ideas or maybe some perspective on how developers can get or should maybe get involved in design?
Use Figma.
In a word, I think that trivially that is the answer, but practically I think that with the sort of plugin API, or API and specifically plugin API landscape that tools like Figma are allowing, is definitely nudging towards a developer-designer relationship becoming a lot tighter. I think we ultimately end up in situations where designers get annoyed because their designs aren't implemented perfectly. Developers get annoyed because designers don't design practically. And if we can effectively close that gap through our tooling, everyone's going to be happier. And I mentioned earlier about return on investment of our designs and our ideas. We can start to really validate those kind of things because we're talking the same language, not practically, but in a collaborative sense, we're all in the same space. And if designers and developers get excited about things like systems and components, they're getting so much closer together. And the no-code space as well is making that really exciting. So I'm really interested to see how that progresses, particularly as developers come into designer space and designers go into developer spaces.
Yeah, that is such a good point. And I think aside from just like learning or getting the frameworks or tools to help make the collaboration between design and development easier, I really do think there's a couple of like core foundations that everyone, like developers, needs to have. before they can actually collaborate effectively with designers, like, especially when we talk about having a shared language or a shared way of communicating. Just basically, like, there are ways a developer can describe a component to you, and you just basically have to laugh because, like, no, that's not the correct name. That's not what it should be called, or that's not how it's meant to work. And that's because they don't have the mental model of design and the core principles around them. So I'll definitely say, like, in as much as Figma makes it like super easy, I think Figma also makes it super easy to collaborate with designers as well. I'd say, like, there's a couple of knowledge you need to arm yourself with knowledge of some basic design practices and principles, right? So I'll share a link to one resource that I shared with my friend a few weeks ago. Who's a developer that's interested in design. So I told him to spend some time, like, going through this education process and trying to educate himself about the foundations of design, consistency. When people say something looks good, is that statement is fairly subjective. And a lot of times designers have spent years designing to know something that looks good. At the same time, a developer has spent a lot of time writing code to be able to tell what good code looks like. But if you flip the equation around, I mean, each of them would mess up because a developer does not know what really, even though you can tell that it looks good, but to actually judge that this is good and give reasons why it's good, it kind of varies from person to person based on their level of experience. So I'll drop you a few links to sort of help you if you're a developer out there interested in learning design. I think it'd be very helpful. So.
Well, I think that is probably all we have time for. It's been a really amazing, engaging conversation, and everybody's Twitter handles are on the screen, so feel free to follow everybody. I mean, y'all are, again, like everybody on this panel is working on some really amazing and interesting projects. So stay tuned because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of updates in the coming months about different things. And thank you so much, panelists, for joining, and my co-host Keon for just being amazing. And this was like one of the funnest conversations I've had in quite some time.
Thanks, everybody.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for having me.
See you all soon.
Bye.